Good afternoon. My name is Janice Lewis George, and I am the Ward 4 Council member and chair of the Council's Committees on Facilities and Family Services. The time is 12:04 p.m. and today is Thursday, April 13th. We are holding this hearing on the Zoom online platform. In addition to Zoom, this hearing is being broadcast live on my website at janiceward4.com/live. Here are some brief reminders about the Zoom platform and the committee's protocols for witnesses participating today. Thank you again to our witnesses for taking time to speak with us today. All witnesses participating in this webinar are currently listed as attendees. When it's your turn to join a panel for testimony, I will call your name and a member of my staff will promote you to panelist. If you wish to activate your video while you testify, you need to click the button in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen that looks like a video camera. Representatives of bona fide organizations will be given 5 minutes to testify. Unaffiliated public witnesses will be given 3 minutes to testify. When your time is up, I ask that you please conclude your remarks so that we can stay on schedule. We will be calling up witnesses in panels of 4 or 5 witnesses, and council members present will have 10 minutes to ask each panel questions. If you have any technical issues during the hearing, please notify my staff either via the Q&A function in Zoom or by sending an email to facilities@dccouncil.gov. Witnesses are reminded to please send a written copy of their remarks to facilities@dccouncil.gov so that it may be included in the record. All testimony and pre-hearing documents are available on my website at janiceward4.com/Dropbox. The record for this hearing closes in 5 business days at 5 p.m. on Thursday, April 20th. Today, we are here to have a hearing on Bill 25-170, the School Security and Transparency Amendment Act of 2023. This legislation was introduced on February 28th, 2023 by at-large Councilmember Robert White and co-introduced by Councilmember Charles Allen, Councilmember Brooke Pinto, Councilmember Zachary Parker, Councilmember Kenyon McDuffie, Councilmember Vincent Gray, Councilmember Christina Henderson, Councilmember Matthew Fuhrman, and myself. The intended purpose of this legislation is to amend the Department of General Services Establishment Act of 2011 to exempt data that is security sensitive from public dashboard disclosure requirements and to require periodic updates to the council regarding maintenance of certain public school security features. Today's hearing allows us to hear from the public and government witnesses about this bill, as well as the specific issue of school security, which we all care about deeply. Recent school shootings around the country and public safety threats here in DC near our schools are grim reminders of the importance we must place in keeping our schools secure from outside threats. The measure before us today, introduced by Councilman Robert White and co-introduced by me and 7 other members, is a meaningful step in keeping our children safe. The committee sent pre-hearing questions to DGS last week, and their responses are also posted on my website, janiceward4.com/Dropbox. We also sent a full list of follow-up questions yesterday to ensure today's hearing is productive and moves along smoothly. I see that I am joined by my colleague, Councilman Robert White, who introduced this legislation. So I'll recognize him now for an opening statement.
Thank you so much, Chairperson Lewis George. I appreciate you holding this hearing, and thank to the DGS witnesses who are here. I introduced this bill as part of a series of oversight hearings and legislative interventions dating back to when I was chair of the committee with jurisdiction over the Department of General Services. My team and I heard frequently about a whole host of issues with DC public school facilities and DGS's maintenance work. The council came together repeatedly to try and work out solutions. In 2021, we passed and funded my bill that directed DGS to set up a public-facing online dashboard showing the status of every public school maintenance and repair work order. Even after the dashboard went online, some of the most alarming and baffling stories had to do with locks and doors. Through emails, phone calls, oversight hearings, and site visits, we heard loud and clear from teachers, students, and families about long-delayed repairs to basic security features. At a time when deadly weapons are far too readily available in DC and across the nation, we cannot afford to let problems linger with school security cameras, public address systems, and door locks. Chairwoman Lewis George, you and your team have always been active on these conversations and looking for ways to help. You and Chairman Mendelson led the council in passing emergency legislation that called for closed-door briefings from DGS and DCPS on the status of critical security features at our public schools. And while I can't divulge any school-level details, I think it's fair to say that we were very frustrated by what we learned. Broken classroom doors and locks weren't getting fixed promptly, in part because they weren't regarded as anything more than routine priority work orders. Plus, it was clear that nobody was deliberately going out and checking to make sure our schools' security features were in working order. In fact, leaders at DGS and DCPS and on the city administrators team seemed to feel that there just wasn't a reasonable expectation to do this. They wanted to rely on school staff to just notice problems as they go about their days, report it, and let the system run its course. But that's a whole other can of work orders. Last year, at DGS's request, I introduced emergency and temporary legislation to make sure that school security vulnerabilities are withheld from the public-facing work order dashboard. But I also promised to introduce permanent legislation on this topic, and I felt it was very important to give our school communities more peace of mind by insisting on periodic, proactive assessments of their safety. Chairwoman Lewis George, thank you for signing on to the School Security and Transportation Amendment Act as the lead co-introducer. I'm hopeful that today's hearing can show us a practical path forward on a set of fundamental goals that I believe we all share: the orderly identification and resolution of maintenance issues, a level of transparency and council oversight that keeps us all moving in the same direction, and most importantly, a school system that is secure against threats to student and staff safety. Thank you again, Chairperson Lewis George, and to the members of the DGS team who are with us today.
Thank you, Councilmember Robert White. I want to check to see if we have any other colleagues who are here. I think Councilmember Fruman told me he was going to be here for this part. All right, we do not see Councilmember Fruman. So what we will do, thank you, Councilmember Robert White. What we will do is we will call up our panel of witnesses. We have Ebony Rose Thompson, President and Ward 7 Representative of the State Board of Education. Frazier O'Leary, Vice President and Ward 4 State Board of Education. Kathy Riley, Ward 4 Education Alliance and Senior High Alliance of Parents, Principals, and Educators. David Albert Ross LSAT and Ward 2 Education Council. Mary Filardo, 21st Century School Fund and National Council on School Facilities. And Sarah Cisna, Capitol Hill Cluster, PTA. All right, good afternoon to all of our witnesses. I see President Ebony Rose Thompson, Ward 7 Representative of State Board of Education. Good afternoon and welcome, and you can begin your testimony when ready.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Lewis George, Councilmember Robert White, who I believe is also in attendance, and any other members of the council. My name is Ebony Rose Thompson. I do represent Ward 7 on the State Board of Education. I also have the privilege of serving as the president of the board this year. I do want to make clear that I provide this testimony not on behalf of the board, but in my individual capacity. I would like to begin with appreciation for paying attention to the safety and security of our schools, our students, and of course, the educators within them. We have definitely heard and seen. I am one of the members who regularly tours facilities with my own council member, Vincent Gray. Heard and seen concerns about doors, alarms. I would also add PA systems and security cameras. Many people do not think of PA systems in particular as a security issue. However, I can imagine we have all been in situations where someone has told us, whether it's a fire drill or it's been a real situation where someone has said everyone needs to do X, Y, and Z. I have several schools, and I'm not going to get into school level data, who have issues with this. But I can say that I have schools that are using walkie-talkies instead of PA systems. I have schools who have doors and alarms that do not work and have not been remedied, and are doing their best to follow the process that they have been given. Back in September of 2022, I believe it was WUSA 9 did a story that myself and my former colleague, the Ward 3 representative, Ruth Rottenberg, both participated in. It was actually in response to Uvalde that they took a look to see what some of the security concerns were. And they found about 60 of our DCPS schools were either down to one security camera, had at least one broken security camera. 60 is definitely too many. In theory, one is too many. But since they were able to find that, I know others are able to find that. I know that means we know what needs to be fixed. And I would prefer for it not to be so easy to know when our schools and our students are vulnerable. I do want to, I don't know what's happening. I do want to push a little bit to say, I'm always concerned when we only limit legislation to DCPS. As someone who has a substantial number of not just of charter schools, but of charter students in my ward, we have to make sure that what's good for kids is good for kids, agnostic of the sector. Currently, the state board is employing a process through the National Association of State Boards of Education. It is a Healthy Schools Facilities Network that we're participating in, and we are working to set a definition for what is healthy, safe, and educationally appropriate across all facilities. And have been in contact, of course, with the Deputy Mayor for Education's office to see how that can then be adopted in our upcoming master facilities plan. I do mean what I say when we say our recommendations need to be across both sectors, because I can't imagine that anyone would say they don't want our kids to be safe. The last thing I'll say is we held a panel at the state board, which I think was particularly informative. And I do actually want to thank Vice President O'Leary for identifying the foreman who came before us, because I believe he was at a board for a school, who talked about the possibility of allowing school staff, like the foreman himself, and having people on staff to be able to fix some of the things like a broken lock, like getting keys made, like those types of things at the school level, so they didn't have to wait for someone from DGS to respond. This particular custodial foreman had been with the district a very long time. So he has seen all the iterations, and thankfully he chose to make it a career to stay with us in the education system. And he noted that once upon a time, we did have people in-house who could remedy many of these concerns. And that, of course, was a time long ago. But maybe that is also a solution we can look at when we think about how to get these things done quickly and correctly. So I thank you for the time today. I will make sure to provide written testimony. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next, we will have Dr. Fraser O'Leary, State Board of Education Vice President and Ward 4 State Board of Education Representative. Good afternoon, Dr. Fraser O'Leary. You just have to unmute. Press the space bar. No, that didn't work. There you go.
Okay.
Great. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Councilmember White and Councilmember Lewis George. My name is Fraser O'Leary, and I'm testifying this morning as an educator and the Ward 4 representative on the State Board of Education. My testimony is the result of my observations of our Ward 4 schools. These observations do not represent the board as a whole, but I'm sure that they represent what is happening throughout our city. The safety of everyone who works in our schools is of primary importance. No child or adult should have to work in a building that is not safe because the measures that we have provided do not work, are poorly maintained, or are neglected. It shouldn't be too much to ask that all our school buildings have working security systems, public address systems that are continually functional, and doors and windows that lock. These are basic needs. For much too long, there's been a lack of accountability from the appointed members of the executive branch that are responsible for taking care of the basic safety needs of all who work and learn in our school buildings. The epidemic of violence in school buildings that has seeped into our society is only one person with an automatic weapon away from having us join the line of mourners in our brother and sister states. The reason that our schools no longer have open campuses is that in 1995, a student at Cardozo High School, Antar Hall, was killed by one of his classmates who left the campus at lunchtime to get a weapon and then came back. We had one security guard in the entire building. The next day, secondary campuses in DCPS, this was when we only had DCPS, were closed and security rules changed. All our students take the measures that they use daily to enter the buildings for granted. But if the doors are not able to shut properly, or the public address system doesn't work, or if the alarms are dysfunctional, we are skating on thin ice. This bill will finally allow there to be a continual link between the schools and DGS, so that if something doesn't work, there will be an immediacy to fix if that has been lacking for too long. All of those who are in school buildings every day deserve no less than that. I would just want to piggyback on what Representative Thompson said. I mean, I obviously was in the school buildings long before there was a DGS. And we were very comfortable with the people in the buildings who had the skills to fix the things. Now that most of the schools have been remodeled and are computerized, it's a different kind of a problem. But the people in the building should be able to fix a lot of the things in the buildings. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Frazier O'Leary, for your testimony. Next up, we have Kathy Riley.
Hi, thank you for this opportunity, and thank you, Councilmember White and Councilmember Lewis George. The problems with security objectives are well documented. Often the way things rise to the top of a priority list is for them to be highlighted and made public. We support this bill. The publication of repairs needed to a security system actually put that school community at greater risk. The repairs needed are significant. In meetings I have chaired, school leaders have spoken of exterior doors of secondary schools that do not close and securely lock, secondary schools without exterior doors that are alarmed. In school modernizations, there are office spaces that do not have a PA system, and when schools need to be repurposed, this also has been an issue, where the new use does not have a PA system. All offices should actually be required to have a PA system. The issue with interior doors has been longstanding and is primarily in the newer buildings. DGS has outlined the 7-step process and noted that this is by far the most frequently reported issue. Is it at all possible, as has been noted, that these repairs of interior locks specifically could be addressed by the custodial staff? It is now over 15 years since some of the first schools were modernized. Their security surveillance systems are not all functional and are outdated to an extent that compromises their ability to keep their buildings secure. This is a small capital budget issue. The DGS response noted that there is a window longer than 45 days. This rises to the level of reporting to the council. That seems too long for the more serious issues, particularly exterior doors. So I would highlight that. While this bill addresses the requirement for DGS to work with each DCPS school's principal to conduct a comprehensive assessment, the real need is for these things to actually get fixed. This will be more challenging in an environment where they are not public. There should be some metric where the satisfactory completion rate is noted. If these issues are not addressed in a timely manner, the school communities will be forced to take the issue public in hopes of getting them resolved. DGS notes that the inspections were formerly performed by DCPS and in the case of charter schools by the LEA. There will be cost in requiring this of DGS. Since they are responsible, it seems correct they should be part of the inspection. So I think that has to be addressed, the cost. In closing, noting the answers from the Public Charter School Board, it does present the question, to what extent is the city government responsible to the families in public charter schools for their safety? They are public schools. However, the LEA is responsible, as noted. Is this right? I know this has been brought up, but I think it's something we actually have to address. I don't think the charter school families understand that the city is not responsible for their safety. At least that's the way we currently have it. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for your testimony, Kathy, and I will have some questions at the end for this panel. Next up, we have David Alpert. Good afternoon, David.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Lewis George, members of the committee and staff. My name is David Alpert, and I am the president of the Ward 2 Education Council and chair of the Ross Elementary LSAT. I support Bill 25-170 and appreciate your efforts to improve school security and transparency. At Ross, our school has lacked a working PA system for a considerable time. As an old and historic building, it is not easy for DGS to repair or replace the PA system, but our school administration has been waiting for a long time. Repeatedly, DGS specifies a completion date in the near future, but then arrives and says they need parts or can't do it, and the cycle repeats. Just last week, they told your staff that the task would be completed on April 7th. It was not. We all fervently hope that there is never an active shooter type event in our school or any other. But in the horrible eventuality something like that did happen, our school leaders may not be able to communicate with everyone. Also, we have large windows in our attic where the library, art, and music rooms are located, which are wonderful. But teachers have no way to black out the windows in case students need to shelter in that room. And in the art room, the lights cannot be turned off because the switch controlling them broke and has not been repaired. This bill would take significant steps toward improving school safety. I have a few specific suggestions for the bill. First, in the list of items for the security plan, please add blinds on interior windows and also the ability for a teacher to turn off lights in any instructional room. DGS should further ensure that all these items are part of a checklist considered during the design of any school modernization or addition, and perhaps the law should specify that. Second, please include LSATs in the list of entities whom DGS must consult with on the comprehensive security assessment, as well as principals. Principals or their designees should certainly be the main point of contact and the main decider, but this is the kind of topic that LSAT should advise on. That would ensure that some parents and teachers, including the WTU building representative, who is always a member of the LSAT, are able to see the plan and notice any problems or omissions. Third, I likewise recommend you specify that DGS can and ideally must also share information on the work orders with principals and LSATs of schools, as well as the chair and staff of the committee. Right now, if principals aren't getting anywhere with safety work orders, the LSAT is one group they can go to. And we should ensure DGS doesn't refuse to share updates or even refuse to share them with the principals themselves on the basis of this bill, even though the bill only actually talks about the dashboard. If the only other pathway is to contact your staff or you, that could be a large burden on you all. Plus, what if one day there's a less accessible and proactive oversight chair over DGS than the one we have now? Allowing LSATs to be engaged in understanding the safety issues will allow principals to have backup in dealing with them and avoid creating an administrative bottleneck. Finally, should safety work orders have to be disclosed publicly after being fixed? I agree with the sentiment that we don't want these publicly listed now when they're open, so security halls are not advertised. But if work orders can appear on the dashboard maybe within 30 days after being fixed, that would allow people to see what DGS has in fact achieved. And a parent or teacher who's nervous could see it was fixed. And if DGS improperly marked something fixed, people would notice and be able to intervene. A potential perpetrator would even not know that it wasn't really fixed or believe it's fixed and thus be deterred. Perhaps there's an important safety reason not to do that, but I think we should err on the side of disclosure to make this dashboard the most useful it can be. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for your testimony. And I will have questions at the end of this panel. Next up, we have Mary Filardo. Good afternoon, Mary.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having this hearing. I'm Mary Filardo, and I'm Executive Director of the 21st Century School Fund. And I'd like to speak to this School Security and Transparency Amendment Act. I think, I know that Councilmember White spoke of it as a permanent measure, but I think as a temporary measure, it can be passed as is, but I actually have two major concerns about this legislation. One, it's a very ad hoc approach to facility condition oversight and accountability. And what I worry about is it's making more work for DGS at a time when they're overwhelmed, and that it's essentially supporting the same kind of reactive behavior that we have in our maintenance and operations system now. It's just sort of one more reactive sort of activity. The other concern is, as you've heard from others, that it applies only to DCPS and not to charter schools. So what I would love for the committee to be looking at is a systems approach to accountability and transparency. And in this, I think there are sort of three major elements that you'll want to be looking at. One is sort of what are the facility features that need inspection? We've got fire code inspections. There's lead and water inspection that the Healthy Schools Act introduced, which actually does apply to both sectors. The fire code inspection that recently took place in last spring of 22. As far as I can tell, there's no results on the charter schools. I don't think they actually inspected the charter schools for fire issues. And what other, as we've seen through the pandemic, what other health inspections might be appropriate in terms of air quality or other kinds of asbestos or toxics. We know there's asbestos inspections from AHERA. So right now there's sort of a hodgepodge of assessments, inspections, and then of course the transparency on it is again all over the map. So I think that's one thing that needs to be a part of a systems approach. The second thing is, what are the standards against which we're looking at this? And a number of folks have raised that issue in their testimony. Does every school have to have a PA system? Do they all have to have surveillance cameras? How many cameras? Does it have to do outdoor space as well as indoor space? Every inside space, sort of these are, you actually can't do an assessment unless you have some kind of a standard. And so these need to be determined, and how will they be determined? Who will determine them, and how are they going to be kept up? And the third thing, of course, which again, this legislation speaks to, but again, in a very limited way, is the requirements for reporting and transparency. Again, there's very little transparency around the charter conditions and the charter facilities. And a key example of this is the fact that even in this education facility master plan process, we don't necessarily get any reporting on the building conditions or their capacities or utilization. And certainly we don't have information on their asbestos abatement plans, or where they've got lead in paint or other kinds of toxics in the schools. And then what we don't have in an accountability system is what are the issues around if you don't comply kind of a response, either in terms of reporting or in terms of repairs. What happens? And that would be again a part of a systems approach to oversight and accountability. So I think some working committee with the good folks at DGS around how to do this oversight and accountability in a more coherent way, so they're not running after the latest kind of issue that's come before the council, and kind of running around like, oh well, now we'll do an inspection here, and now we'll do a report here, and now we're going to do a dashboard like this, but that there is actually some coherent approach to the facilities conditions around their reporting and the accountability associated with them. And then really right now in our laws, the omission around charter and the lack of transparency on that, it needs a thorough look. And I think that the council has all kinds of tools to encourage and incentivize compliance, and I think they need to use them. I think it is unconscionable that we think that we are not actually, as we pay over $1 billion a year to operate public charter schools, that somehow they are not obligated to report to the public how those dollars are spent and the conditions that we're getting as a result of them, and that we don't have some obligation to all of those tens of thousands of kids in the charter schools, as State Board Ebony Rose Thompson sort of identifying. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. And I'll have questions in this panel. And our last witness is Sarah Cisna. Did I say that right? I hope I did.
You did.
Great. Thank you.
Hello again. Chairperson Lewis George and members of the committee, my name is Sarah Denhart Cisna. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the Capitol Hill Cluster School PTA. Changing a door lock is a routine task that happens daily in our society. Houses and apartments change renters or owners, locks are changed, keys are handed off, and new residents go to sleep at night safe in the knowledge that they have keys to working locks. But this task appears to be insurmountable when it comes to the Department of General Services and classroom door locks within DC public schools. Supposedly as a matter of security, the Department of General Services dashboard does not list any pending door lock repairs at any DCPS school, but if they did, your head would spin with the number of times work order estimated completion dates are extended. I started to summarize an email thread started by our PTA advocacy chair that began back on August 27th, 2022, about open work orders at Stewart Hubson Middle School, but my own head began to spin in disbelief. I've provided a copy to committee, but the quick version is this. There are classroom door locks at Stewart Hubson with work orders dating back to spring 2022, 1 year ago, that remain incomplete. Just one example. Work order 722906 started in spring 2022, was escalated within this email thread with several other lock-related work orders on October 28th, again on November 13th, and yet again on November 21st. Chancellor Farabee even weighed into the email thread on November 30th, attempting to provide completion updates, but then retreated, writing on December 1st that, quote, "We believe DGS is best suited to address the specific work order update and what hurdles remain in the way." The email thread continues with periodic inquiries from both the school community and council members requesting status updates from both DGS and DCPS. A picture of the door and broken lock was shared with DGS. When DGS responded to requests, it was with repeated extensions of estimated completion dates all the way up until just last week. On April 5th, the most recent response from DGS was, quote, "When the technician was on site, he was unable to locate the door needing repair." The classroom, in fact, has two entrances, and the technician did not walk the less than 10 feet down the hall to the other door in need of lock repair. Thanks to our very polite yet tenacious advocacy, Chair, we have been able to doggedly follow up about these seemingly never-ending work orders related to door locks and safety at the cluster school. But as others have also pointed out, this is a problem district-wide. Since I last spoke to you at the DGS performance oversight hearing on February 28th, there have been 2 school shootings on elementary, middle, or high school campuses in the United States, and a handful of others on college campuses. We should be doing everything possible to keep our teachers and students safe. Working door locks seems like an easy fix. But since neither DGS nor DCPS leadership appears willing to take ownership and address the system-wide failures to meet the needs of our schools, we appreciate the Council's efforts at an intervention and urge you to vote yes on the School Security and Transparency Amendment Act of 2023. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your testimony. I'm just going to ask questions of the entire panel and bounce around to that. And then Councilmember White, I'll have opportunity for you to ask questions. Thank you, Dr. Fraser O'Leary, for mentioning that these are basic needs. I'm hopeful that this can be an easy change to implement here. But I know that Ms. Thompson and Dr. O'Leary, you all are the state board is doing current efforts related to school facilities, actually a very thorough job on work around school facilities. I wanted to see if you all could speak to sort of what work the State Board of Education is doing around facilities, what you all are seeing, hearing, and how this legislation or others can be a part of the work that you all are doing at the State Board of Education level.
Sure, I'm happy to just start. So first, I'm not sure yet if we have a recommendation around what legislation would be helpful. We could and we might. I will say what we've done is we went after actually a grant from the National Association of State Boards of Education to be able to bring together a team for DC to explore what's already on the book. So like, I believe it was Mary who started to talk about, like, we actually do have standards for certain things, and some of them actually do apply cross-sector. So like, what do we already have that's laid out? Where are there gaps as far as where we need guidance? And then like, what processes do we need to employ to establish like a more consistent approach? The reason we saw a particular opportunity now is because we have to do the master facilities plan, and we are also doing, of course, like the boundary and assignment study. Both of those processes should be taking into consideration the conditions of our facilities. And when we take into consideration the conditions of our facilities, we should be using similar guidance. So literally what we're trying to do is establish a definition for what is healthy. And when I say healthy, I do mean both physical and mental health, safe, and educationally appropriate. So things like, if I know I just had BART in Ward 7 for a while, BART was in the elementary school, it might be kind of hard to have a chemistry lab in the elementary school. Like, that would not be educationally appropriate for the program. So how are we setting definitions and standards for this? Literally a floor for facilities is the way I like to describe it. I will also say that we do actually have one member of our team who works in one of our larger charter LEAs, because not just because we want to say, hey, like, here's what you need to be doing, but because a lot of times we focus on publicly conversations around not just what DCPS needs to do, but exploring their challenges. And I would say we're not as familiar with the challenges, constraints, but also some of the solutions the charter sector might have to offer. Our report will be due at the end of June.
Okay.
And so, yeah, we will share that with the council, but we have been working in very close consultation with the Deputy Mayor for Education's office.
Great. And Dr. Earlier, did you have anything to add there?
This is an emergency that's not recognized by the government. Because if it's recognized by the government, then it needs to be taken care of immediately. We have a change in leadership at DGS. I'm hoping that the change in leadership will cause change in the response times. I know that there's a window that is much too large of a response time. What we do as members of the Board of Education is talk to the principals and the teachers in our wards. And almost all of the schools in Ward 4 have security problems. Right. I'm not even going to get into the HVAC problems, just security problems. If everybody can go to a building that's secure every day, that would be a major transformation in DCPS. And I charge the members of DGS to pick up that baton and run with it. All right. The history is horrible, but the history isn't going to help anybody. We need to think about the future of what DGS does for the buildings in our city. I know DGS has all of the buildings in our city, and it's an enormous responsibility, but our children come first. And we have to get the public address systems working. We don't want to have an active shooter going on in a building where the alarm systems don't work or the public address system doesn't work. That's happened in these schools throughout the United States almost every month. And we don't want that to happen, but that's DGS has to pick it up and take care of those work orders. We know there's a preponderance of work orders that haven't been finished, but just call the schools and find out and get somebody out there and do it. Show us that it's an emergency, because it is. And the mayor needs to understand that it's an emergency. We have new buildings, and some of the new buildings don't have security systems or alarm systems that are working.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think one thing we talked about is really, I think what I think is threaded through everyone's sort of conversation here is that what I think is there's no proactive check for sort of school security systems and issues. Right now, it seems, it appears that we're at a reactive state, right? And I think what you were saying is that, and essentially for DGS, it's DCPS's job to do DCPS has to utilize the work system to enter requests, and they're responding to their client agency, which is DCPS. The issue is that whether it's the problem is DGS has to some DCPS things are under safety. And so I think the question is having a clear understanding of whose responsibility it is to be proactive, because what's working against it is that DGS is being reactive to security concerns and then being slower in that reaction. In fixing it. And so I think there has to be a conversation, which we'll talk about with government witnesses, which is like, how are we being proactive as DGS, who is at the end is going to have to do a lot of the work to fix it, and how are we going to be proactive as well with DCPS as well to make sure that we have just like there should be an annual comprehensive security assessment. Instead of us relying on the work order system, which is a reactive system and not a proactive system.
But there also has to be a standard, and Mary actually might be helpful here. Literally, it's great for people to report out challenges they have identified. My concern is two things. One, that some challenges may not be identified. And two, how are we prioritizing what rises to a, yes, we need to take care of this right now safety standard. And so there are other states, and I'm going to say states because we're going to be the 51st state, right? Like there are other states that literally have standards and checklists. Like we're not debating. And so I don't think of it just as like DGS's lack of responsiveness or DGS's lack of proactiveness. DCPS also has to prioritize their cases. Like they do, that is part of our process that we are not addressing. And so like we have to decide like what's good for all, and how we are going to make sure that we're reporting against that, identifying those problems and actively addressing them. Yeah.
Agreed. Mary, I know everyone has brought up this. Thank you all, everybody, for raising the issue of including public charter schools. We've been told that because DGS doesn't manage maintenance for charters, that changes to the law to include them in this check will have to go through the council's committee of the whole. And so my office is in touch with Chairman Mendelson's office and working on finding a solution to include them. But I wanted to see if anybody wanted to speak to. I know we don't even have right now, as has been alluded to, essentially, we don't have a standard yet, even for DCPS. And so I wanted to see if you sort of had any suggestions on in including charter schools. What else? What do we need to do to include charters in this as it makes it to the committee of the whole?
Well, in the existing legislation, as you're, I was looking at the language and basically suggesting that you could, as I was trying to see that, you could have the whoever is doing the inspections on the upfront side report it, for DCPS, the problems go to DGS, and for the charter schools, they go to the LEA and the LEA board. And essentially then they would be responsible for the whatever transparency or not they would have, and for the follow-up on it. I mean, I think you could, if that takes it to the committee of the whole, because it involves an other agency, but it seems to me that it could be fairly simply done. I mean, I was playing around with some of the language. I'm happy to share it with you. But I think it's something that the city and the council have to be wrestling with openly, which is the issue around sort of the lack of transparency into the charter sector. I mean, you certainly heard about that with the teacher pay.
That's right.
So I think that that's something that Chairman Mendelson might not want to be bothered with, but I think it's something that we all have to wrestle with.
Yeah, I appreciate that. David, I agree with you on adding LSAT to list of groups consulted on comprehensive assessment. I think that is very fair ask for all the reasons and more that you've stated. So we'll work through that through the committee print in that regard. You had two other recommendations, which is blinds on interior windows and lights they can turn off. I think I can surmise why, but I just wanted to hear your sort of reasoning on why that needs to be added.
Yes, thank you. I'm driving now, so I'm gonna not maybe look at the screen. The teachers at our school have raised the concern that yes, they're in the event of a shelter order, as I understand it, then you want everyone to hide in the room and black out the interior windows, so that anybody who's it's horrible to think about this, that is moving around hallways and looking for targets or whatever doesn't know where there are any children. Okay. And so as I understand it, the recommended protocol is I don't know exactly how, I guess turn off the lights. I mean, this is raised by teachers, and close the window blinds internally so that nobody can see. So if that's correct, and that this was raised by teachers in our school, they said they understood that that's what they should be able to do. And then they can't do it. Like in the art room, for example, it's a whole wall is glass, which normally is wonderful. You can see all the arts, and it makes it very light because it doesn't have windows because it's in the attic. But in this event, there should probably be some sort of blinds that they can drop down so that nobody could see into the room.
Okay, perfect. That makes sense. And understanding sort of what teachers are feeling and how they think would be better. I want to give Councilmember Robert White an opportunity for a round of questions for this panel. Councilmember White.
Thank you so much, Chairperson Lewis George, and to all the public witnesses. To pick up where the chairperson left off, I think that DGS is going to have to, and the city, consider building standards across the board, very sadly, for issues like active shooters. And so these types of common sense of things, we need to be talking about them. Lights that turn off, making sure blinds can go down. I'm sure there are other best practices that we can find relatively easily. They go against some of our existing building standards that are put in place for environmental reasons, but we have to contend with that. So this isn't, school by school, classroom by classroom solution, but that we are unfortunately taking into account what we see around the country. I also agree with David Alpert's recommendation to include safety related fixes after the fact. I think this is important because often people talk about the gaps in communication and not having a feedback loop. So often as a parent, I know some of the things that are broken in the school. I don't necessarily know when or if they get fixed. But the other thing is sometimes things are reported as fixed. And if we don't get communication, the school doesn't get communication confirming that they are fixed, we can't say, hey, no, this thing is still broken. So for those common sense reasons, I do think that recommendation is an important one that we should take seriously. On the issue of charter schools, really difficult to do in temporary and emergency legislation. As we look toward permanent legislation, as much as we all hope that there will be no active shooter incidents in our schools in the future, if this bill passed as is, and such an unfortunate event happened, not in a DCPS school, but in a charter school, we will have to say to ourselves, what should we have changed about this bill? And so rather than reach that point, we have to work with the committee of the whole and the charter school board to make sure we are on the same page, because charter schools are public schools. We have to, President Thompson's point, we have a responsibility to all of these students and families. And, the politics get in the way, but this is more important than politics. And so we have to navigate it. And I think that we can. Question I had for Mary Filardo, I appreciate your thoughts and recommendations. And I want to drill down on them a little bit. You had mentioned other inspections that are required, like water and asbestos. Are those things, I think you mentioned this in your testimony, but are those things happening with fidelity now across DCPS or across DCPS and charter schools?
Well, it's hard to know. I mean, AHERA inspections are required, have been required by EPA for a long time for charters and DCPS. I know, for example, though, at a recent hearing on Roosevelt Stay, which is at Garnett Patterson, that the latest AHERA inspection had been, years before. And so that was running late. And when that finally came in, they found asbestos that needed to be abated. And there's a whole controversy associated with that at Garnett Patterson. But there should be a record. I mean, it's a space by space monitoring of where asbestos is in the schools. I know that the charter schools are supposed to do it. And in terms of, fire code, it looks to me like the fire department did not inspect the charter schools for fire code violations. There are other inspections. Again, this was just from the Healthy Schools Act for water, lead in water. But in terms of lead in paint, I don't know what's there for the charter schools. And I'm not sure that there's a regular inspection in DCPS. I know that if you're going to be doing your DGS folks will know this well, but I know that if you're going to be doing any painting or work in there, if you've got, paint, you're going to have to test for it, whether or not there's lead in it. And we certainly know that in our old, in the old schools, like in Garnett, there'll be lead in that paint.
Okay, so I guess what I'm suggesting here is I think from an ideal point of view, that recommendation is right. But if we're saying, hey, let's do this along with other inspections that may or may not be happening, I don't want to have these safety issues under question. And there's always a tension between dealing with the system and circumstances we have versus trying to start over and create a new system. And there's not a perfect answer, but that's something that we have to think about as we digest that recommendation.
Well, just one comment quickly on that, Councilmember White, is that a part of as DGS is looking at incorporating preventive maintenance into its work order system. It was one of the things that kind of came out from the audits on the work order system. Part of what is very commonly in a preventive sort of work order system are inspections, regular inspections. They certainly have them on the boilers. The boilers have to be inspected every year, your mechanical system, to make sure it works. And so there could be built into their work order system, the work order for the inspections on all the security and safety systems. So I'm just suggesting that if you could look at it from a systems approach, it is a part of a preventive maintenance system, and that you want to be thinking about that kind of all together.
I appreciate that. I agree. I very much try to be a systems thinker. When I feel like the systems aren't working and things still have to get done, I say, all right, let me make sure I do that thing. You raised something else that we struggle with a lot in local government, and I'm frustrated with the difficulty I've had navigating around it. You suggested that there should be penalties when DGS doesn't meet these standards. I wonder if you have thoughts on what those penalties could be, because I'm with you 100% theoretically, but what are we going to do? Cut their budget? And so if you have any thoughts on penalties, let us know, please.
So well, the penalties go two ways. There's penalties and incentives, right? So in part, I was talking about penalties in terms of transparency and schools and LEAs complying with the inspections and the reporting and the communication. Frankly, for me with DGS, I've testified before on this, they need to be fully funded. They are not fully funded. They don't have a budget for training and for staff, and because they do have repair workers that actually work for DGS, probably hundreds of them. But they're, and also if you look at DCPS personnel, they're poorly paid. The custodians are poorly paid. I think that part of what the district's got to kind of come to terms with is that we treat our blue collar people very badly, and they need better pay. They need better training. They need better support. They need frankly better representation by their unions. And so, I think that we need to find ways to support these people that do the important work. I've always felt a lot of camaraderie with them, because I feel like they're like housewives, right? Like the women that clean in our homes, whether they're, ourselves as that my family did, that you've got to, there's a sort of like, oh yeah, like, fix the lock, do this, do that. Like, what's the problem? Just come and do it. But meanwhile, there's thousands and thousands of doors in the District of Columbia inventory. So I think that we need to really listen to them, find out what they need, listen what they think the barriers are to responding with urgency to these important problems, and take it seriously. But in general, the facilities folks are like, here's your budget, make it work. And they're like, okay, we'll see what we can do.
And can I just add that it's not always like our DGS workers. A lot of times they're contracting this work out.
Right.
So paying attention to like who's getting the contracts, how they're performing, might actually be a place that the council can do oversight, and actually get into like, because it's kind of hard to penalize the government, like that doesn't work. But we are contracting a lot of this out. The other place that I realized I just failed to mention, in Mary's when she started talking about Garnet Patterson, a lot of these temporary facilities also need to be looked at. I have a lot of schools that are finally making their way onto this modernization list. Okay. And so when I go and do my school visits, I look at the temporary facilities as well. And so like if I have a cafeteria that is a tent, and I have people breaking into that tent and there are holes in the tent, like that's a whole host of challenges. And so like some of the oversight we do, of course, has to be focused on preventive maintenance, responding to all the things, but we got to pay attention to our temporary facilities and swing spaces as well, because they seem to just be oversight at this point.
I appreciate that. If I could just say one thing as I wrap up, one of the struggles, DGS is working. Folks are working hard. There are a lot of systems that are not there that should be. And some of them DGS can fix, but some of them require resources that the agency doesn't have. I think your point, Mary Filardo, about folks being underpaid and understaffed is exactly right. I've always seen DGS sort of like, well, it's now passed, but I always thought of them like the federal infrastructure bill. I worked on Capitol Hill with George Bush, Barack Obama. I was gone, but then Donald Trump, everybody was going to get this infrastructure bill. And I knew it wasn't going to pass anytime soon because it wasn't sexy enough. And DGS, for all the work they do and how important it is not sexy enough to get the exponential leap in budget that they need. And so it does leave us asking, how do we manage a broken system or build up enough support for something that is always going to be or generally going to be secondary to funding what's happening in the classrooms, public safety, mental health, police. And we've got to figure out how to contend with that because certainly we're on a cycle. And I think if we're going to take a systems approach, we have to deal with, how do we penetrate the fact that it is hard to get DGS the amount of money that they need because it is substantial. And that, brick and mortar infrastructure funding is really hard to sell. So that's a challenge in front of us, not insurmountable, but it is one that I think we have to contend with. And if we figure that out, we'll make a substantial leap.
One other thing is the people that build these new buildings, they have a 1-year warranty and then they just disappear. And that's what we found with our new buildings in Ward 4, is that everything's working at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Or not everything, but almost everything's working at the beginning. But then the people who built the building are not accountable for their work. I mean, like nobody on this screen has a 1-year warranty on their roof or on their furnace or anything that works in their house. And we don't have that kind of, I don't understand why we don't have that kind of accountability from the contractors.
Thank you, Representative O'Leary. I think DGS has changed that in the past couple of years, but I'm going to let them respond to that later because I think it's an absolutely correct point. Thank you, Chairperson Lewis George.
Thank you. Yeah. Some of the work that we're doing and following up is specific to some of the contracting issues too. Because while I 100% agree with you, Mary, on sort of how we're treating our workers, especially in the facilities division, I also feel there's a lot of waste, and the waste comes from the lack of systems. So for example, I don't know, Sarah, let me ask you, is the issues with your schools, are those mechanical locks or those electrical locks?
I honestly, I'm not sure. I would have to check with you, but based on the picture, it looks like a standard key in
A standard key lock.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah.
Although I do know at Peabody, the swipe on our C Street side, like we haven't used those C Street doors all year.
That's right. So I think speaking to a systems, it's something we've been looking at is sort of like we do have in our newer buildings, most of those buildings are electrical. Their doors are the new electrical swipe cards. Mm-hmm. And when those have issues, it's taking longer to get them resolved because we didn't have a maintenance contract in place to deal with those new those new electrical doors. So that's an area that's like a systems thing. Like if all of our new buildings are going to be electrical buildings, then we have to have a maintenance ready to do electrical locks and be able to respond to those quickly. One thing that we heard when we've been in the schools is, again, a systems issue creates waste. So for example, we could change. One thing we want to ask is the dashboard can change if your lock is broken. Because sometimes what happens is like a work order will go in 5 different work orders, right? And the work order will say the door is broken. The door is broken or the lock is broken. Well, from DGS, they get that and says the door is broken, his lock is broken. We don't know what that means, because it could mean the lock isn't shutting, meaning the latch is broken, or it could mean the door is broken, meaning the swipe card isn't working. The problem is we have to, when we're bringing things into the system, we need to narrow it as much as we possibly can so that we don't duplicate work. So you don't have somebody coming out and saying, look, I went there and the lock is already fixed, or I can't find the door that's broken, probably because somebody else went out in a different work order and did it. And now we got to pay the second person who just came out to do this. They still got to get paid for time because they came out there to fix the second door. And that way we can save money if we narrow the entry and we're more clear on the work order, and we're not sending 5 people out to do the same job and having to pay all 5 of them. And 5 is an exaggeration, but like 3 people going out and doing the same job for the same door under a different work order. And then sometimes if we send out contractors who do mechanical doors and it's electrical door, then we got to pay for the mechanical people who came out, but it's really the electrical people who need to be there to determine, hey, this is electrical, not mechanical, and we're sending the wrong people out. So I do think, to the greater point, there is a ways we can improve the system to save money, to save time in that regard too. And I think that goes to the greater question of how systems actually save money and prevent long-term issues from happening. And I think that has to be a part of the conversation that we're going to have. And how much of that is DGS and how much of that is the client agencies, and in that regard, and how do we improve what needs to come in from the client agency, and how do we prove it so that's the case. So I think that is a real conversation that we have to have, where the system is also as large. But then there's also just contractual issues like Dr. O'Leary is speaking to. And I found swing spaces are always like when we did the walkthrough for our first swing space, when we got to see the swing space, we were like, what? It had been like neglected, the work that was needed. And there was no way, speaking to the issues that Mary was saying about, there's no way that one foreman was going to be able to clean up that school and have it ready for the first day of school. And they didn't have any backup workers, they didn't have any backup staff. And then we had to call and be like, can you get some backup workers for the foreman? Because this is a swing space school, hasn't been maintenance, got a lot of issues, and they're going to need more than one person fixing that school for it to be ready. So as we look at swing spaces, that's something that we're going to have to make sure we're putting them there, but what does the maintenance look like? What does the support look like for the staff there? Because oftentimes there's more work on the custodial staff in those spaces. And it's not enough people there to do that work, which I think has to be addressed as well. I will note that we do have a hearing coming up again on May 25th. We will be having a hearing specifically. Oh, David, I see your hand is raised. You can respond. I'm sorry.
I'll just add about electronic door locks. Our school exterior door has electronic door lock, and it locks, but it has never worked very well for unlocking. When people press the button, it's difficult for the security officer to see. It's difficult for them to press it. There's always random static noise that comes out of it. Then when she presses the button to open it, if someone's touching the door handle the wrong way, it won't allow it to unlock, or it plays a chime and the door is now open, and often that's after it has just stopped being open and now is locked again. So people have to press it multiple times. People often just have to walk over and open the door manually because the system doesn't work. And that's not a security issue in that, fortunately, the door is locking properly. Yeah. But to get to your point that we are installing some sort of new door locks and they don't even sort of function maybe in the high use, context that they're being designed for. So can DGS have a standardized, product that they use so that they're not using new products all the time? Can we make sure that that's a good product that's going to work and that's not going to be having these sort of other unexpected problems. So I think it gets to your systems, point, like if we're installing something that sort of doesn't meet the need from the get-go, then that's something that we can do better.
That's right. So that's something we're going to be digging into those more with DGS in later in this hearing to get some answers, because those are outstanding questions and issues that have come up that we want to understand and sort of how we can improve this system. To Dr. O'Leary's statement there at the end about new buildings reminded me that the committee, we noticed an oversight roundtable on the recent DC audit report on Roosevelt High School's modernization and the role of consolidated maintenance contractors, better known as CMCs. And that hearing will be on Thursday, May 25th, and people can sign up to testify now on my website in regards to that, which will unpack some other system issues and errors that we need to have systemic fixes for as well. I want to thank our public witnesses for sharing such thoughtful testimony. Witnesses are reminded to please send a written copy of their remarks to facilities@dccouncil.gov so that it may be included in the record, and all testimony and pre-hearing documents are available on my website at janiseward4.com/Dropbox. The record for this hearing closes in 5 business days at 5 p.m. on Friday, April 21st. Now we will hear from our government witnesses, but first I need to swear you all in. So if everyone can please turn on your cameras who will be testifying, and please raise your right hand to prepare to be sworn in. All right. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I am hearing. Can y'all affirmatively say yes? Unmuted. Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
Chairwoman.
Thank you. All right, Deputy Director Gonzalez, thank you for being here. You may begin your testimony.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chairperson Lewis George, council members, Councilmember White, and staff of the Committee on Facilities and Family Services. My name is Donnie Gonzalez. I am the Deputy Director for Facilities Management Division of DGS. I'm pleased to be here today to present testimony regarding Bill 25-170, the School Security Transparency Amendment Act of 2023. Joining me here today is Jerome Jemison, Supervisory Management Analyst for the Facilities Intake Request Service Team, FIRST, and Sean Link, Facilities Operations Specialist in the FMD Division. This legislation would require DGS to complete an annual comprehensive security assessment to ensure the following: locked door, window security, camera, and security alarm maintenance requests have been identified and appropriately entered into the work order management system. All interior doors to instructional and regularly used administrative spaces, and all exterior doors that do not automatically close and securely lock. Also, all exterior windows that school personnel are not able to close, lock, or latch and may not prevent against improper entry. Public address systems that may not clearly be audible in all instructional and regularly used administrative spaces. Fire alarm systems that are not in full working order, and security surveillance systems that are not fully operational with properly installed and oriented cameras, intrusion alarm, and proper connections to a central security operations hub. Additionally, the bill builds upon legislation that allows the agency to omit certain work order data for DCPS from the public-facing dashboard, as they have been deemed to be security sensitive. Bill 25-170 extends those protections to work order data at the Department of Parks and Recreational Facilities. To balance transparency with school building safety, DGS provides the council with a copy of all security sensitive work orders older than 45 days on a monthly basis. The agency supports this redaction to ensure that a hostile party will not have access to information that could be used nefariously to target these public facilities. DGS has worked to upgrade its online public work order dashboard which can be used to track all open work orders within DCPS buildings. The data includes specific location, description, prioritization, and aging periods for each work order listed in the dashboard. The dashboard also includes information on work performed in buildings. This reporting tool is a milestone for the agency and furthers DGS's goal to provide accountability and a new level of transparency to school communities, especially given that the dashboard includes information on anticipated timeframes for when repairs will be completed. DGS is excited that starting in October 23, the dashboard will include work order data for DPR facilities as well. The Department of General Services supports the intent of Bill 25-170, but we would like to raise some considerations. DGS does not currently complete an annual comprehensive security assessment and instead relies on our partner agency, DCPS, to enter requests through the work order system. Each school building is unique and has different features and systems that are installed. This is also the case for DPR facilities. This legislation will need to account for resources and operational changes needed to implement these requirements. DGS building managers, DCPS staff, and school security personnel will work to address the criteria listed in the bill. DGS stands ready to work with the committee and the Office of the Chief Financial Officer to calculate a fiscal impact for the legislation, as funding will be needed to implement this bill. Thank you again for this opportunity to discuss this measure, and we are here and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony and response to the legislation. I want to just begin with just some questions and follow up regarding your first conversation around like resources, additional resources that would be needed or necessary for this legislation to be put into place. Walk me through what additional people would you need to have in place to be able to do this?
Well, when looking at what the legislation requires, and I went over those details in my testimony, in order to prevent anything from falling through the cracks, in a day-to-day facility management operation, we look at 4 areas. First is inventory. We've mentioned the need to truly understand and have a list of what assets we have within the portfolio. So when it comes to inventory, we plan to improve the existing process by generating an inventory of all physical security assets that DGS is responsible for, and then entering that data into the work order system. It also requires assessments. So DGS will have to coordinate with DCPS on an annual assessment, developing a schedule that is likely rolling throughout the year, where we can receive that information and update the system. Also, data integrity. We will need to assign FTEs that will monitor for brand new buildings coming on board and plugging in all of the new lock schedules into the system, and just keeping the data up to date on an ongoing basis. And finally, as we understand the intent of the bill is to eventually be able to repair, we anticipate that with additional proactive assessments of these assets, we anticipate an increase in reported repairs. And so I'm very excited for the mayor's investment of $1.1 million in repairs to existing doors and locks. And this was based on existing repair trends. But as we find more, as we look for more, we will undoubtedly have some additional repair needs.
Okay. I'm going to follow up on that later because I want to ask some questions that will probably help me gain more insight into that particular answer. I want to go to, in response to pre-hearing question number 3, and what you just said now, DGS does not complete an annual comprehensive security assessment and instead relies on DCPS to utilize the work order system to enter requests. If we added this requirement, which agency do you think should be physically doing these checks, DCPS or DGS, and why?
Well, since DCPS currently has their own physical security division and are responsible for the physical security checks in their locations, we believe that DCPS should be responsible for this. They have oversight of their own security. And while we do have a protective services department and serve as a security experts for other municipal buildings, DCPS has a dedicated team. And so we believe that they should spearhead the assessment.
Yeah. I mean, my issue with DCPS doing it is that the professionals, those with expertise who know sort of a lot about, and my understanding is like some contractors need certifications to even be able to be a client for DCPS security systems. And so my issue is that if DCPS does it, those who have whatever certifications they need in both mechanical and electrical security systems are on the DGS side, not the DCPS side. So they would just be making, in my opinion, the experts are not the ones are not doing the assessment. We'd be better served with those with the expertise and the skill, which DGS requires of their contractors and in-house people to do it. You know, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think currently there are divisions and responsibilities. So, DCPS is responsible for their camera systems, right? They're responsible for the management of the key card systems.
That's right. But they have a contractor.
Right.
They have a contractor who manages the CCTVs, the whole CCTV system, for example, who is also, I think, a DGS client as contractor as well.
Right. They have security personnel, magnetometers. They monitor the security alarm systems. So their intrusion detection systems are all monitored by DCPS. So I do think there's a room for partnership, especially as it relates to our responsibilities, because they intersect. Their security systems won't work unless the electricity is working in the building. We provide some of that underlying infrastructure. The repairs to the doors are squarely within DGS's wheelhouse. So right. I think there needs to be a partnership, but because DCPS manages their own security, I think it makes sense for them to also manage the annual assessment.
Okay. How about managing the process or being responsible that someone, DCPS or DGS, checks each school every year? Is that the same answer?
It is the same answer. And we do request as part of this impact statement that we will be submitting FTE support to help assist with the generation and the housing of the inventory, as well as the assessment entry into the work order management system. So I do see a partnership with DCPS, and there's a role for DGS as well.
I know my issue with the partnership piece is that that's a lot. It's always moving. It's moving people, moving parts, and it sort of slows, bureaucracy always slows things down and in a way that we need to be efficient. But I hear what you're saying in that regard. I mean, DGS does a blitz right? The blitz is do you all consider that blitz to be a DGS blitz, or do you consider it to be a DCPS blitz, or is that the sort of level of partnership you're speaking of when you say this? Because in my mind, you already do a blitz. You check, you go through each school and you do sort of repairs. If you all are doing the blitz, that's another conversation, doing the blitz again, why can't the blitz that we do be the same time we do this assessment, this annual comprehensive assessment? Like, so while you're out doing the blitz, there's somebody who's going out at the same time who is responsible for the assessment of security and of doors. Like we could just, so that was a lot of questions at once. One, do you consider the Blitz, DGS, or DCPS?
The Blitz is it's both. I mean, it's DGS is certainly spearheading the work, but DCPS helps prioritize. We don't work independently from that prioritization. But I will say, I think during the Blitz, that may be a great time to do an assessment. It's really about setting up the infrastructure behind it. So what tends to work in terms of inspections is having a rolling schedule. We have, like it was mentioned earlier in the hearing, there's about 17 different environmental factors at which DGS tests in our school buildings. There's asbestos, radon, lead, and more. And we have it on a rolling basis, even lead and water. So I think having a rolling basis schedule to assess the door locks would probably work best in conjunction.
So you're saying versus an annual, you're saying do like a rolling basis one versus an annual one.
Right. It'll end up being a year for every school building, once a year, but we spread out the assessment so that we can get to every building.
Okay. I'm not sort of adverse to that idea at the moment. I think that's fair.
And if I could add
out that I'm talking about, like, this is about just assessing, right? Just checking, not necessarily fixing, right? But just checking, right? Because I think what I'm finding is that a part of the problem is that the people diagnosing the problem and putting in the problem sometimes mess up the description of the problem. They don't thoroughly explain the problem. And so then y'all are left having to decipher and figure that out. And that is taking more time. So the reason why I just think you're best is because you can go out and say, your team wouldn't come out and say, oh, the door broke. Your team would say, the mechanical lock is not working. The latch is not clicking. You'll have like a real true diagnosis of a problem. And so you can just checking. That way, like the work order that gets put in is like the true real work order. And then we could eliminate all the other work orders in the system that say basically the same thing. Front door broken, front door locked, front door this. And you all are the best people to say, this is the actual true description. And now I can send out the right contractors to fix this issue. And I don't got to worry about sending out mechanical and it's electrical, or sending out electrical and it's mechanical, et cetera, et cetera. This is why
this is absolutely true. But what puts us in the best position to be more efficient and responsive to making these repairs, it starts with the inventory, having a specific inventory of every door in every building. And when I know what locking mechanism is a part of that door, the exact location of the door, we can get past some of the logistical challenges of just a work order that was put in. We'll know exactly what our inventory looks like, what parts to keep on hand, and we'll be able to be more efficient when we respond to them.
Okay. I agree with you there. Let me ask you this. How many building managers does DGS have? And how many facilities does each of them manage?
So DGS has approximately 26 members in the building management team, and they manage collectively 680 properties. And 9 of those 26 members are actually supervisors, part of that building management team. And facilities that are assigned can range between 30 to 100 sites per building management specialist. And it really depends on the grade and title of that building management specialist.
All right, we gotta get that number down. If I was a building manager and I was assigned to 30, if I was assigned to 30, I feel that 30 is the minimum you said. If I was assigned to 30, I'd be like, cut, you're gonna need to count me down to 10. And I can effectively do that job.
It is a lot of work. And we have
Yes.
great members of the team that, I mean, they're really
Oh, no,
dedicated.
let me say that the workers at DGS are phenomenal and skilled in those regards. I'm just speaking of what I was trying to get a sense of their workload and sort of in the regards of then they would be spread thin. And then adding this to their plate would be a lot, which is what somebody said in testimony, like, how are we doing that? So, right, because if we did this as written right now, my assumption is that the building managers would be the ones to do this check.
Right, they would certainly be a part of it, and we would utilize DCPS staff as well to help with the checks. And right now, the IFMA, the International Facilities Management Association, they set a benchmark at 4 properties per building manager. Just to give you a
That sounds
bit of
about
context.
okay, right. That sounds about what that should be. So that's a lot. And so I hear you. DCPS would be a part of it. Again, I'm saying DGS should be the lead because I needed to be put in the right way. We need to be put in diagnosed the right way, put in the right way, so we can get the right people to fix it.
If we have that inventory, when we would integrate it with our work order system. So if someone reports a door, we'll know the exact door and how it operates, what kind of equipment.
Right. I got you.
So it'll make it easier for them to report.
I like that. Okay, so yeah, because there's two things to this proactiveness, which you're right about. So one, having this sort of comprehensive inventory map of like every door, every lock within every school and every school system will make the job easier from a process standpoint and system standpoint. So getting that inventory map together is critical because that would save time. And then 2, in addition to that inventory map, we need to and then that on top of that means that would make it when we diagnose a problem and diagnose the issue, having it means we quickly know it's Coolidge building B, door A, and we know from our inventory map that this is this kind of system and this is what we can do to send it out. Okay, got it. I think you're right on that for sure. Okay, why does DCPS maintain their own CCTV cameras and intrusion detector systems? Is it like that for other client agencies?
You're right. DCPS manages their own CCTV, and it's because they have a dedicated team. They're comprised of security experts. They monitor and maintain their own systems. And yes, DGS does maintain similar systems for agencies like DPR and other municipal buildings. But to answer your questions, because they have a dedicated team.
Okay. So yeah, it's just because DCPS is taking that on, they have a dedicated team there. Do you think, do you all believe that is, well, I guess it's less work for you, so I'm sure you believe that that's the best way to go. I'm not going to even ask questions. True. Okay, so in that regard, okay, well,
they do have unique needs that are specialized to schools. Schools have very unique needs, and so I mean their population, everything, and in light of some of the risks that were discussed earlier in the hearing, it makes sense to have dedicated focus for their sites.
Yeah, my understanding, I mean, I think what the CCTV sort of the system represents though is a way a system can work because because they maintain that CCTV system, they sort of have what we are trying to get to, which is a inventory map of all their CCTV systems. They have they can be proactive because they can see from the back end when systems are down, when they're not working. And instead of waiting for a work order, they know that they need to fix it in that regard because they can see it on the outset, and it allows them to be more proactive versus reactive when that situation happens. And I think that's what we're just trying to do on a broader scale as it relates to security, other security systems and issues. Let me ask you this: how do you ensure that you're using certified or qualified contractors to work on some of those more technical systems?
Sure. So during the procurement process, DGS uses a technical evaluation panel, and they review all of the qualifications for the contractors that are bidding for the work, and it's prior to the issuance of the contract. Also, the contracting officer, technical representative, which the COTAR, they conduct annual performance reviews for each vendor. And so those qualifications that make them eligible also get transferred to the subcontractors as well.
Great. What about subcontractors?
Right, those subcontractors, apart from having a subcontracting plan, we extend all policies and all requirements to the subcontractor performing work.
Okay. Let me ask you this. How do you interpret the word prompt in section 2E2, where it says the department shall provide prompt written notice?
We define that as monthly, or I'm sorry, yes, monthly. That's correct. Yep. 30 days.
Okay. The section 2E, going back, still in section 2E, section 2E 2, 3, and 4 relate to DGS's public work order dashboard and are very similar to current requirements. Do you anticipate any challenges in that regard with the version in the introduced version of this bill?
No challenges anticipated, Councilman.
Okay. In response to question 8 of the pre-hearing questions, you said DGS, and I quote, DGS added a feature on the requester side of the work order workflow, said that DCPS can indicate for DGS in the work order that it is a security sensitive issue, which I think is great. Was there any sort of training or guidance shared with DCPS staff on how to determine what is and isn't a security system? So what is and isn't security sensitive, going back to my initial thought about what's coming into you and how it's coming into you?
Yes, I'd like to ask our head of FIRST, Jerome Jemison, to answer this, but I believe there has been some, and we do lean on the DCPS security team to weigh in on what is considered security sensitive.
Councilwoman Lewis-George, thank you. The answer to your question is yes, but it is a very recent addition to our work order management system. So DCPS was notified, and in the future we intend.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, in the future, we intend to continue to work with DCPS to make sure that they are able to identify what security sensitive issues are. And that is also in coordination with DCPS's physical security team.
Okay, so I think because I think this is a great addition. I'm very excited about it, very happy about it. Appreciate you all for adding this as a part of the work order and input system. What I would like to see is just a training happen with the custodial and security staff for all of DCPS and helping them understand what is and isn't a security sensitive system. It sounds like in sort of maybe like an email went out or a guidance went out, which is great, but I don't believe from that email some people will be able to ascertain what that is. By the way, can you all send me what the email that was shared in regards to the guidance that was shared with DCPS staff? That will help me know if they can ascertain it from it. But I think what would be helpful is if we can do if there could be some type of like training or guidance, not just an email, to make sure that they understand and got it, so that when they do put it in, they really understand it.
Will do. We will send it over to you. We do understand that a training program is necessary, and that a process that is new like this will impact day-to-day operations. So we know that there's going to be ongoing discussions required with our client agencies and their physical security team to make sure that this is a success.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Let me ask you this. How do you all define security sensitive, these S words, security sensitive and decide that without a standard?
I want to be careful to make sure that we don't assume that the facilities intake service team are physical security experts. We are doing this to in coordination with DCPS, a physical security team. But at a very general level, when we look at a work order, we're relying on the information that comes through in the work order. If the client tells us that a door cannot secure or a window is broken and cannot secure, then we approve and prioritize it as such. But to be able to clearly identify what security sensitive issues are, we will be relying on coordinating with our client agency to make that determination.
Okay. I mean, I think if I was just coming up with security sensitive, I would be like anything that anytime anyone can breach a door, a exterior or interior door, anybody can breach a window, any access point, that anyone who is not allowed to be in that space or come into that space can do, or, this is just me saying it, but I think it's easier to come up with what security sensitive means in the sense of, is there a concern that harm or danger can come to, because it could be anybody, children, families, anybody inside. Yeah, like, I don't know. Does that sound right? You get what I'm saying? Like there is a sort of common sense thing that in the sense of like, if you think of security sensitive, can someone breach my front door, come in right now and do whatever they want to me? Is there a barrier in place that is working properly for me to protect myself if necessary?
Okay, Chairwoman, I think that is very, very common sense. Here at DGS, we tend to look at it through the lens of facility management, right? If we step away just for a second from a physical security standpoint, we would receive a work order for an exterior door that cannot lock. That to us prompts an immediate response. When we know that there's an exterior door, because someone could gain access to that building and cause an issue that can impact programming in that building, right? And so we want to make sure that building is secure. We immediately respond within 2 hours. That, from a facility standpoint, is an emergency. An interior door lock, while very, very important, and from a security perspective, can definitely prompt concern. From a facility management perspective, it would not stop programming. So given our definitions for emergency, high priority, and routine, an interior lock is treated differently from an exterior door lock for that reason. But it's not our position to speak for DCPS security. If we were to raise that to an emergency, what I'm concerned about is just having the infrastructure in place to be able to quickly repair that lock, having the bench strength and having the inventory in the system to know what type of lock I need to repair, and having those parts on hand. That we can do as long as we have the infrastructure and the resources to support that level of response.
Got it. I hear what you're saying. If we made all of these emergencies, then we wouldn't have sort of the necessary sort of resources, manpower, and time to be able to respond to them within the emergencies time that we in that regard. Okay. That's on us to fix. Okay. In response to, in preparation for this hearing, we got a number of people who emailed us saying, this is an issue and we want it to be addressed. And so I want to just go through a few of these because I think it highlights a greater issue and why this legislation is so important for us to get done to immediately. So in response to pre-hearing questions number 9, we asked why 36 of 40 open, lock, and door work orders as of March 31st were assigned the priority routine level. And I know DGS cited an example of a work order where a key fob isn't working properly to explain why to follow the letter of the law. DGS is omitting work orders from public view that may not necessarily pose a direct security risk. I do, however, remain concerned with the priority levels we're assigning to lock and door issues. And I'm not convinced that example is representative of all the lock and door issues we're seeing, many of which do pose a safety threat. And so here are a few work orders that were shared with the council that were open as of March 31st and have been omitted from the public dashboard. There is a school where the requester said the entrance door is unsecured, and that got assigned routine and has been open over 180 days. That work order is 721-821 if you want to look in the system. Why is that work order why was that work order marked routine? And why has it been over 180 days?
Jerome, could you speak to why it was marked routine, please?
I would have to look at the work order more specifically. I see that the assignment description that you have here, the entrance door is unsecured. Certainly from our standpoint, that work order should have been marked as high or emergency with an immediate response to make sure that that facility was secure that day. Or to Deputy Gonzalez's point, within 2 hours for emergency purposes. But the example that DGS provided of a routine work order was not intended to say that work orders, lock and door work orders, should not be high or an emergency in certain cases, but rather to provide an example that there are instances where work orders can be prioritized as routine, high or emergency. And it just depends on how the work order comes into the system and what information we can gather from the work order.
Okay, well, see, that's my issue with, like, this is why y'all are more, because if it comes in entry, if the entry comes in and it doesn't sort of, I mean, we have a new system now where we can say this is security sensitive, and I hope that will help, and we're gonna train people on what security sensitive is. Is this an example? With this example, if they would have marked this security sensitive, which is added, would that have changed? Because right now that got assigned routine and it has been over 180 days. Would it being marked security sensitive been allowed this emergency?
There's a very human element. There's a very human element to work order review at the intake process. The new radio buttons that we added to the work order request side, if it is indicated as a security sensitive issue, it does automatically flag that work order as a high priority at a minimum. So the system will make that work order a high priority, and then it will be further triaged by the team to determine if it's an emergency, such as we cannot secure this door today. And then there may be instances where that work order may be lowered to a routine priority. But being able to mark it as a security sensitive issue gives us some comfort in knowing that work orders are being prioritized properly right at the intake process by a system mechanism versus just a very human review and having to make a determination. Again, I think we explained that intake personnel are not physical security experts, and they are sifting through quite a few work orders on a day-to-day basis. So we produce this tool not only for our clients to be able to indicate for us when they feel like there's a security sensitive issue at hand, but it also helps our intake team sort the work orders properly.
Okay. Let me give you another example, because I just want to make sure we are all sort of on the same level as it relates to this sort of what is going to be considered emergency as we move forward, and in light of this, in lieu of this legislation. There was another requester who said door lock, and I quote, has been damaged and removed from the door. That was assigned routine and has been open more than 4 months. I'm not gonna put the work order out because I sent those previously. Why would this be marked assigned routine?
And council member, I think what's consistent about these two questions and work orders like this is that there's a disconnect between something that may be considered an emergency or high priority from a security standpoint, and something that will be an emergency or high priority from a facility management standpoint. And what this legislation is setting us up for is to more proactively look at these components of security and figure out what it would take to build that infrastructure to respond to those issues as an emergency. It sets us up for that. And so that misalignment is what we're seeing from a work order management perspective. An interior lock is treated very differently from an exterior lock. And so that's something we need to look at. And then in terms of the time it takes, we've had several hearings speaking to the work order management, logistics, SLAs, timeframe to respond to work orders. And we've stated that this is something that we need to address. SLAs, we need to look at these SLAs closer, but it needs to be based on real data. And while we've improved the intake process using our first team, there's still work to be done around assigning and routing, the QA/QC, and the closeout, capturing that financial data from the work orders. And this is what this is why we're building out the work order the work order lifecycle team that'll be joining the DGS team, basically looking at the full life cycle of the work order. And that'll help with the logistics around getting to that backlog, or saying, here are some work orders we can't get to either for procurement reasons, resource, labor force reasons. And at least we can have a better idea of how to match resources to SLAs. And so these are items that we're going to be looking closely at, the backlog when this team joins DGS, and we'll be looking forward to addressing the backlog.
Okay. What is, I know you've talked about this, that DGS is just, has said during past hearings that you all are going to sort of the performance plan, service level agreements, and priority level assignments concerning work orders are undergoing that internal review. What is the timeline for the internal review? Can you share what that will look like?
All right, we believe that it will be finalized in FY24. And the reason is, when this life cycle team joins and we have an opportunity to review the backlog and to really dissect those work orders, it'll inform us what SLAs currently, where SLAs stand given current resources. There's also been some incredible investments this coming fiscal year in the proposed budget. And we continue to ask for your support on preserving that the mayor's proposed budget for us, but that goes into locks and a number of work order reduction initiatives. So I think FY24 will be a great time to really match resources to output, realistic based on data, and have an SLA that is more realistic.
Okay, so the deadline, so I'm about to be Councilmember Gray. What's the, what date can I hold you to?
To where we can have fully written SLAs. I would say in FY24. It may be sometime between mid-year and fourth quarter, but because we need time to really work our budget and work with our client agencies. But certainly middle of the fiscal year in FY24, I think, is realistic.
Okay, that's stressing me out, but okay, I would like us to shorten that. I would like us to shorten that if possible. I think what is just a bigger sort of one of the biggest questions I have is sort of, and what I'm trying to rectify in this whole thing is like sort of as it relates to like work orders, you know, a sort of just what's an emergency from a security perspective and what's an emergency from a facilities managed perspective. And I think those two levels of thinking need to be on the same page. And it feels like that's what I'm thinking is the bigger issue here, is that we're not on the same page as in bridging those two things together.
I agree, Chairwoman, and I'm sure you're aware that when we have a flood at a building, we have a water main break, we have the bench strength to immediately be dispatched. I mean, we have war stories of a water main break on a Friday, and the building is ready and operational on Monday. Burroughs is an example of that. We have the bench strength to respond in that way, because it's not just designating it as an emergency in the system. It's having the contractual support and the infrastructure in place to respond in that way. When it comes to the interior locks, that is not the case. There are critical data that we need in order to build out the infrastructure to be able to respond as an emergency. And while we agree with the intent, it's about having the resources to build that infrastructure and respond in that way. And we agree with the intent of the legislation of the bill, and we just ask that we take a hard look at the resources needed to implement it. And even when we begin these assessments, when we ultimately do them, it'll yield more information, because we're not just looking at what's not working. We're looking at what's working and what isn't. And so if we see more to do, more to fix, that will require more resources to actually do the repair.
Okay. And so I know we're doing the work for the SLAs, and that'll take some time. We talked a lot about like sort of this almost inventory map of things on the portfolio. And I pointed to how CCTV is currently managed within DCPS, and how they can be proactive because they're tapped into a system. They have a map of everything and they know where everything is. And it means they get to be proactive in that regard. What are we doing right now to create the inventory map that we need regarding, I'm gonna just stick to security, regarding sort of doors, both external and internal, because I think internal is emergency. And I hear you saying, yeah, I think so too, but resources would have to be on a different level for an internal door to be an emergency in the way an external door is. So, which is resources is something an us issue that we have to work on sort of how we situate your budget and what we put there. But I guess I'm trying to figure out while we're working on this, what are you all doing to create the inventory that's necessary to know what doors are in what locations, what's mechanical, what's electrical. And that's the process that needs to happen very quickly to be able to address the security issues that we are seeing in the work orders that I sent to you and the ones that I've named on this hearing.
That's right. So the areas are the doors and hardware inventory, the public, the PA system inventory, and the fire alarm system inventory. What we're doing now is because fire alarm systems are already a part of annual inspections, we have a good sense of the inventory that we have in fire alarm systems. Public address systems. Last year, we cataloged every PA system that we have in each building, what type of system. Where we need to go further there is understanding in every classroom, administrative space, what are the call boxes, the exact type of call boxes in those space, are they audible? And then there are some spaces that as part of the ed spec may not have been designed for to be a classroom or an administrative space.
Oh,
And so sometimes there may be a space that doesn't have a PA system. So what are those locations and where they need to be installed? So we've done a lot on our part, but as we get into the fiscal impact of this bill, we'll be able to spell out where we need to close the gap and where the resources need to be for us to get there.
Okay, so because I think you can cluster some of these things. Like, we know all of the new modernized buildings are electrical. We know that. That's where we're moving forward, I think, as a district, that most of the modernized buildings have electrical doors with key cards, et cetera. So I think, am I right in saying that? That's a large group. The new modernized schools are sort of one big cluster of, we know, sort of, at least bare minimum, these are our majority electrical buildings. Then we have schools that are waiting to be modernized that we know are going to be mechanical now, but the future of them are electrical. And then we sort of have everyone else in between. I just want to know, can we now just start the clustering of schools into the categories of doors and locks, and then can we work from there in doing the identifying work? Because it kind of has to happen like now. This has to be happening simultaneously. So what I'm trying to hear is that DGS is doing that now and trying to narrow down what the timeline is for you to do that for all of the schools.
Absolutely. We have door schedules. We have, information on a lot of the cores inside of our hardware, and where we have that information, we can certainly gather. But there will be situations that will require manually walking to school and identifying doors, their exact locations. And then it's the process of entering it into our work order management system, so that a tech that is on site can look at their phone, pull up the work order, and know exactly where to go. That integration of our systems are going to be critical in order for us to, truly implement the intent of this bill.
Yeah, I agree with you. Can we do them? I mean, and this is me asking you truly, can we do those two things separately, or do we have to do them together? Meaning, can I have someone now starting to do the manual, just the walk around manual, creating that database of IDB Wells is a modernized schools, electrical doors. These are where this is the system key to all the electrical doors, where they are, and having people on the ground to do that for like all of our schools. And then in a separate instance, as the one person is just going around doing that work. They're not putting in work orders. They're not doing nothing else. They're just putting they're just taking an assessment. And then on the other end, which I think will take longer, are the people going around to all of those schools and doing the work order input piece of things as well. Do these things have to happen simultaneously? Because I think we could just do them separately, and that would save at least the time of getting the inventory. I'm just calling it an inventory map. The inventory map that I'm talking about.
Chairwoman, it's important that if we were to truly implement this, that we have a organized process to in a logistically efficient process.
Sounds like I can't put it on the building managers, because that's like
they're tough, and I mean it's the ratio is tough, and so to have a very thoughtful, thorough preparation for this, I think it's certainly worth the the investment. Very difficult for me to commit to being able to do it without the resources. I mean, with all of the competing priorities, very, very difficult.
Okay. All right. I appreciate that. This has been very helpful in getting feedback and knowing sort of how the system works and sort of constraints and how this legislation can be implemented. Before I ask my last question, which is a little bit off topic of this, is there anything else you want to add on the record regarding this legislation?
Chairwoman, I just want to thank you for your leadership and keeping security on the top of your agenda. I want to thank the mayor for her investments and our Director Delano Hunter for his continued support. We again agree with the intent of this bill, and we will work diligently to get it done should it be passed. And we just ask for your support for the mayor's proposed budget and the fiscal impact statement that will likely be submitted to the committee for consideration.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And we will work together on that and putting and what's been put forward by the executive and working together with you all. One last question while I have you. What's the status of DGS hot cold seasonal changeover? It's 90 degrees out today. I'm getting emails and messages because it's 90 degrees out today. And we have schools that have not been turned over yet. How many schools, can you just give me an update on how many schools have their AC turned on and how many are still waiting?
Absolutely. We are just had that up on my screen. Overall, we're sitting at approximately 40% on average with the switchover process. We are on schedule for a May 15th switchover for all properties, but I will mention that each property is a bit different. We have some systems that are VRF or variable refrigerant flow systems that can be switched over in a day, and those are typically on the tail end of the switchover process. We tend to focus on the buildings that have more of a mechanical manual operation in order to switch over. We're working through those. We have well over 550 buildings that we switch over in a 30 to 45 day period. And we recognize that we have some very hot days. And then
That's right. Next week,
some days
they're talking about 80s, 90s.
It's tough. We're pushing
Climate
overtime.
Climate change is here and is waiting for none of us.
Understood.
We gotta speed it up as possible. I understand that there may be some sites that need contractual support for the switching over. And I know you all are in full throttle there. Will be helpful. I think we asked for you all to send over sort of a schedule. And I also, you all expect you to be prioritizing, schools specifically.
Yes.
So
we have spring break.
Right.
We have spring break next week. And so
Right.
we'll be in full force at our buildings switching over as fast as humanly possible.
Got it. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that update. If you all can share a copy of sort of what the schedule is. I think we sent out a request last week, so I want to just make sure we sort of have a schedule or an abbreviated schedule. You can put an asterisk next to the buildings that need contract support to be able to get it complete, but just want to get a sense of that. And I'm glad that next week we are on spring break, so some things we'll be able to get a rush done there, especially if contractors need to come out to assist in that regard.
Absolutely, sure. All
right, it is 2:12 p.m. We are concluding this hearing. Again, a reminder to witnesses to please, the record for this hearing closes in 5 business days at 5 p.m. on Friday, April 21st. And to send a written copy of your remarks to facilities@dccouncil.gov so that it may be included in the record. Thank you to the DGS team, to my committee staff, and to the council members, Councilmember Robert White, his staff, and other member staff who showed up. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.